Good morning, welcome to everyone. My name is Peter Tanghe. I am Technology Counselor China for Flanders Investment and Trade, soon to be based in Guangzhou, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. I want to highlight that this webinar will be recorded. You will have the chance to answer questions in Teams. I will ask our speaker to answer them live. For any specific questions, we can also follow up after the webinar. Let me introduce the agenda and the speakers before we dive into the webinar content. First, Mrs. Yu Chen will give us a brief overview of the CRC China program and the actions that are being planned in the near future. Yu Chen is responsible for the China desk of POM Limburg. The focus of the webinar today will be on IP. Protection of intellectual property has always been one of the top concerns of our entrepreneurs in China, and of course the fear of being copied. However, the good news is that China is also developing a lot of the IP on their own today, and really have realized the importance of having a framework and the business and legal environment that support the protection and the enforcement of IP. For this topic, we have a speaker who is both specialized in China and in IP, Mr. Valentin Delacour. Valentin is a Belgian lawyer. He's based in Brussels, has been active in IP for 15 years. He studied at the UCL and KU Brussels law and intellectual property law, and he lived in and worked in Shanghai from 2012 to 2016. And during his stay in China, he worked with both large corporations and small and medium businesses specifically on IP. First with DeWolf and Partners, later with CFG, a full-service China-focused IP firm. Today, he's a partner at Dahl de Wolf in Brussels, where he co-heads the IP IT team and leads the China IP desk. And he's also acting as an expert for the China IP Helpdesk of the European Commission. So these are our speakers for today. Can I also remind you to turn off the camera and microphone? So again, you can ask any questions by chat, and we will then I will then ask the speaker to answer them during the break or after the end of the presentation. So with that, I would like to invite Yu Chen to give us an overview of the Cleantech Route China upcoming actions. So Yu Chen, the floor, or better the screen, is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. I will share my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So good morning. Cleantech Route China is a cooperation between the 5 Flemish provinces, several provincial development agencies, namely the POMs, Cleantech Flanders, and Flanders Investment and Trade. The project is aiming to give support to Flemish cleantech companies. Our project is a continuation of the I2PCC project. I2PCC was a project of 2 years funded jointly by European Regional Development Funds and the regional governments, run from 2018 until 2020. It gave us the opportunity to work out a new joint activity program, which now will be continued as Cleantech Route China. It will be fine-tuned in the coming years. The new project program is focused on 3 main activities, namely informing, promoting, and connecting. As you know, China is a huge country. So the Cleantech Route China will make use of the sister regions which we have connections in China from the 5 Flemish provinces and the FIT network to maximize the chance of success for our Flemish companies. Now you can see the geographic layout of our network focused in China. We have developed a solid relationship with the local government, companies, knowledge institutions, sector associations, and so on through the long-term cooperation. So how can we serve you? We will inform you on different aspects of the Chinese market in order to prepare for actual culture of business exchanges. We offer hands-on approach and open for individual questions. It is quite similar to the setup of these serial webinars. You can also find out more information via our website www.cleantechroadechina.be. The website will offer information, case studies, relevant events, and of course, you can register for our newsletter. You can also request a physical or download a digital brochure. However, both the website and brochures are only available in Dutch. We still have 3 more coming up webinars with very relevant topics in each webinar. So don't forget to book in your agenda and make the registration. You can either make the registration via the website of Cleantech Route China or the website of Flanders Investment and Trade. Here is the timetable of coming up activities of Cleantech Route China. All these activities are aimed for Flemish companies. We will have an online mission to Chongqing and Chengdu in cooperation with Flanders Investment and Trade. The registration is already closed, but you still can make your chance for the 2 Expo in the second half of this year. The CPIC Expo in Beijing and the IE Expo in Guangzhou. We will have full support of representative of Flanders Investment and Trade in China with physical booths in both expos. We warmly welcome Flemish companies to join us. Please consider that the online mission in June is for multi-sectors, and the 2 other expos in the second half of the year will be focused on cleantech sectors. You can get most up-to-date information regarding those activities also via the Cleantech Route China website. Over the past years, we have put up together a catalog for Flemish cleantech companies. We will make an update before the expos in Beijing and Guangzhou. We will use the catalog to promote the Flemish companies to our network during events or meetings encounter with Chinese companies and government. As we are making the update of the catalog, if you are a cleantech company and have the interest of entering Chinese market, now is your chance to reach out to us and let us help you to spread the word. Take contact today with my colleague Sarah Landay. You can find her contact information on the slide. So this was my brief introduction about the project Cleantech Route China. Now please welcome the China IP SME Helpdesk expert, Mr. Delacourt.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, hello everyone. And well, first of all, thank you to the FIT and all the organizers for the kind invitation to have the opportunity to talk about IP in China. It's of course an important topic, as Peter highlighted already. We have around an hour together to talk about IP. So I've made certain choices. I decided not to dig into the technicalities of IP rights in China. I think we don't really have the time for that. And I made the choice to approach IP in China from a high-level perspective. I think my idea is to provide you with an overview of the context of IP to make you understand how much the IP landscape in China has changed and has changed for the good. And obviously, and I will finish with that, to give you some practical tips and to go with you through some steps that you should undertake if you want to, to define a relevant IP strategy when it comes to dealing with China. Here is an overview of my presentation. I will start with a few words on the importance of intangibles in today's economy. I will then focus on the context of IP in China, go through a few facts and figures that I believe are important and interesting. We'll give you a very brief recap of the main types of IP rights and of trade secrets, explain really the difference between what is an IP right, what is a trade secret. It's very important to understand that if you want to protect them correctly. And then the last part of my presentation will be dedicated to 6 steps that a company should take in order to protect its intangible assets when it enters the Chinese market or when it deals with Chinese companies. So to start with, a few words on the importance of intangibles in today's economy. Well, what is IP? Maybe let's start with this important question. What is it and why was it created? Well, basically IP refers broadly to creations of the human mind. So it can be an invention, it can be a new design, it can be a work of art, it can be a technical drawing, for example. And IP, the idea of IP is to protect intangible assets that will meet certain conditions. So typically a patent, if you want to have it protected, well, your invention will need to meet certain conditions. It must be new, it must be inventive, it must be applicable industrially. And intellectual property is there to protect the interests of innovators and creators. How does it work? Well, the whole idea of IP is to grant an exclusive right to the owner of the right. So what is an exclusive right? I will come back to this important notion, but basically it's the idea of a monopoly, which means that you can exclude others from exploiting the object of your right. To come back to the idea of a patent, you have an exclusive right on an invention. If someone exploits your invention on a market, for example, China, where you have a valid patent that has been granted, well, you will be able to enforce your rights and to prohibit him from exploiting your patented invention. And so IP rights are really the basis, the basic tools to enable businesses to exploit their intangible assets. It's the legal basis for licensing, for example, the legal basis for protect you against copies, against counterfeits. And the reason behind is really that IP is an incentive for innovation. You invest in R&D, well, we grant you an exclusive right, we grant you a monopoly, so that's, well, you can get a return on investment because you can control the result of your innovation during a certain term. Now, it's not a scoop. We evolve nowadays in a knowledge-based, innovation-based economy, an economy where basically intangible assets have grown in importance. And there's a very interesting graph that highlights this. In 75, if you take the S&P 500 companies, some of the best performing companies in the world, well, intangible assets constitute 17% of their corporate value. 45 years later, this has intangible assets constitute 90% of corporate value. So extremely valuable assets. And how do you protect intangible assets? Well, through IP rights and trade secrets. So important to know that, well, IP is basically extensively used by the largest companies in the world. They often consider IP as being their most important assets. That IP is the foundation for the market dominance and continuing profitability of leading corporations. So bottom line, well, the best performing companies in the world, they invest massively in IP protection. So of course the question as an SME, well, why should I care about IP? Why should I invest in protecting my intangible assets? Well, there are several reasons for this, and I've listed a few here. I think the first one, most obvious one, is obviously to protect your competitive advantage. You invest in R&D, you develop an innovative technology. If you have a good and relevant IP strategy to protect that technology, well, you will get these exclusive rights, which will give you a monopoly in your technology. And so, of course, this gives you a competitive advantage over other businesses. Another reason that is very important, and I believe especially important when it comes to China, is to attract investments. Very often, if you want to raise funds, one of the first things that VCs or possible partners, any kind of investors will look at is your IP strategy. And myself, in the context of my work, I work for a few VC funds where they basically give me as mission to analyze the technology of a company where they want to invest in. And then the result of my analysis will be absolutely decisive in their decision to invest or not to invest of the company. And this is certainly true when it comes to China. I remember back in 2014 to go to a fair on a biotech trade fair in China. And I attended there a roundtable by VCs, and it was one of their main message. If there is no patents at stake, we just don't look at the company. We won't look at the investment file. So very important if you want to attract investments, and in China you do have a lot of companies with cash to invest, well, have a sound IP strategy. Freedom to operate. Having a good IP strategy can reduce the risks linked to technology commercialization. Basically, the idea is that if you have a good IP strategy, well, you limit the risk that you will infringe the IP rights of third parties. It also gives you increased control when you outsource. So again, when it comes to China, still a very important manufacturing place. Well, if you want to manufacture your products, or if you want to source high-tech components in China, it will be important to have a good IP strategy. Well, for obvious reasons, you select a manufacturer, he has to manufacture specific parts of your technology, of your products. You will have to communicate to that manufacturer a lot of sensitive information, technical drawings, information regarding manufacturing processes that you don't want to have disclosed. Well, two things that are important to secure that your manufacturer will not exploit your technology for others. One, negotiating good contracts, obviously, but secondly, having a good IP portfolio. So having a good patent portfolio, for example, that covers China will reduce the risks that a manufacturer will start using the technology you transfer to him in order to have your products manufactured. Well, you will reduce the risk that he uses that technology, for example, for your Chinese competitors. Tax purposes can also be a reason, especially in Belgium. We have an interesting IP box tax regime. And obviously, well, IP is important and can be key when you enter new markets, because it will render your business and your company more attractive to develop partnerships. It will help you secure your position on the new markets by well, protecting your competitive advantage on that market. Now, what do I see in practice? It's that very often with younger companies, smaller companies, SMEs, scale-ups, well, they obviously know that IP exists, they know it's important, but they very often perceive that as a nice to have. And so they do a minimum, as opposed to bigger companies, as I mentioned, that approach IP as very important assets that invest massively in their IP protection. Now, it's true that developing an IP portfolio can be costly, especially when it comes to patents. It is costly. And so, well, the result of that is very often smaller companies perceive IP as a cost, while the message I try to convey is that they should perceive this as an investment. Because having no IP will lead to missed opportunities. increased risks, more difficulties, that for sure. And so it's very important to develop an IP strategy, to be proactive. IP is not, with some exceptions, but they're not automatic rights. So you have to decide and to ask to be protected. This requires to be proactive. Developing an IP strategy and relevant IP portfolio requires to start early, because very often you have to meet the condition of novelty, which means that if you disclose, for example, an invention before filing for a patent application, well, you will not be able to obtain a patent anymore. So very important to be proactive and to start early, to anticipate. And obviously, well, your IP strategy should be aligned with your business strategy. IP is really there to support your business, support your growth, create value. But so bottom line here is treat IP as a profit center. Again, this is especially true when it comes to China, when it comes to doing business in China, because once you get into the IP troubles there, it will cost you a lot more of money, and it could even be fatal for your China projects. So let's move to IP in China and, well, go through a few facts and figures that I believe are important to give you a certain feel of what is going on in terms of IP in China. The first thing to understand when it comes to IP in China is how much the IP landscape has changed. Basically, in less than 4 decades, the IP landscape has evolved from a no man's land to a top national priority. At the end of the 70s, you probably know that China started to open up to the outside world under the impulse of Deng Xiaoping. But at the time, well, you had no IP laws. You had no patents, no trademarks, no copyrights, nothing. 40 years later, IP has become a national priority. And I will come back to this because it's very important. Politics are always important when it comes to China. And well, IP is a top priority of the Chinese government with clear results, as we will see. China today is a member of the WIPO already for many years. The WIPO is the world's intellectual property organization. China is also part of all the main IP international treaties and agreements. So it's kind of part of the world IP order. And as a result of this, well, you have a complete set of IP laws in place. You have a modern IP system that has been adopted in less than 40 years, which is pretty impressive. Second interesting fact is that China is the #1 country when it comes to the numbers of patents, trademarks, and also design applications. This has been true for many years. In 2015, more than 1 million invention patents were applied for with the Chinese Patent Office. It was the first time in history that more than 1 million patents had been filed. So China made the headlines. All the media talked about it. Again, the debates around the innovation in China started to heat up again. Is this the sign of a truly innovative economy? Is this the result of tax incentives and just numbers that China wants to put forward? Well, at the time, I think that the reality lied maybe a bit in the middle, but it's a fact that a lot of patents are being applied for. It's a fact that foreign companies file massively their patents in China, and that Chinese companies develop huge and relevant patent portfolio. And in 2018, well, more than 1.5 million Chinese invention patents had been applied for. So you really have these trends of massive filings in China. Three, internationalization. Well, not only do Chinese companies massively file at home, they also file more and more abroad. And in 2019, China became the #1 PCT applicant. For those who don't know what the PCT is, it's basically an international treaty, the Patent Cooperation Treaty, that enables a company, anyone, to internationally apply for patents. And so typically, well, the PCT system is a system you use when you want to protect an invention on a large territory. It enables you to internationalize your patent portfolios. And so it's an interesting number, because it proves that, well, Chinese companies not only file at home, but also more and more abroad. And the top PCT applicant was Huawei, the Chinese telecom giants that you probably know. Now, there are many things to say here. Chinese companies do massively file abroad, but very often it's more limited to the big China giants. Chinese SMEs are really much focused on their domestic markets very often, at least until today, and do not necessarily file abroad already. But bottom line is that this trend is only going to increase, because today you have all the China champions, they massively file abroad. But I believe that on the longer run, more and more Chinese companies will develop interesting patent portfolios abroad. And so this is only the beginning of a trend. Interesting also to see that China was the top trademark applicants at the European IP office, followed by Germany, the US, Italy, and Britain. So yeah, 2020, Chinese companies massively filed trademarks at the level of the European Union. Again, a strong indication of their internationalization. China is also a top IP litigation country. It has been the most IP litigious country in the world for many, many years now, since at least since 2005. I didn't find recent numbers, but in 2017, you had more than 16,000 patent litigation cases that were introduced in first instance in China. Don't have the numbers for Belgium, but it's probably less than 50. So it's an important difference, 16,000 less than 50. And it's not only a question of number here. This has very practical consequences, because it means that you have judges in China, you have specialized IP courts with judges that have been involved in hundreds of patent litigation cases, 100, 200, 300, 400 cases handled by a judge and his technical advisors. That means that these judges, well, they have a very intimate knowledge of patent litigation, of patent law. They perfectly understand what a patent is. They understand the value of a patent, and they basically render very good decisions. So really experienced judges that render good decisions, not everywhere, not all over China, but in specific IP courts, you do have really excellent judges. Interesting to know also that IP litigation cases are mostly domestic. They mostly oppose Chinese companies between themselves. Again, I don't have recent numbers, but those I found between 2011 and 2014, well, only 4% of the cases involved a foreign company. Okay, so it's really mostly Chinese companies that develop interesting, valuable IP portfolios in China, and that use them in the context of their economic competition. Now, there is a trend of more and more cases involving foreign businesses, but not necessarily as plaintiffs, more as defendants. Two interesting trends. One is more cases are filed against foreign businesses by their Chinese competitors that, as I just mentioned, develop valuable IP portfolios and force them against foreign entrants on the Chinese markets. That's one trend. The second trend that is really interesting is that more and more foreign businesses use the Chinese jurisdiction in the context of patent litigation, in the context of patent wars. So nowadays, very often, if you have a global patent litigation war ongoing between two companies, well, you will have a litigation in the US, you will have a litigation in Europe, very often in Germany, and you will have a litigation in China. Why is that? Well, because the system can be trusted. That's one reason. Second reason is that China is a highly strategic place where you can litigate for two reasons. If you can obtain an injunction, an order to seize the exploitation, for example, of an important invention, well, you can block a competitor on the Chinese market, huge market potentially. So that's one reason why it's so strategic. A second reason is that very often important parts of the supply chain of a company is located in China. And so if you can obtain an order not to implement, not to exploit a specific invention in the supply chain of a competitor, you can basically disrupt the whole supply chain at a global level by just litigating in China. So China is a highly strategic place where to litigate patents nowadays. And more foreign businesses are using it because they trust the system. If it was so uncertain, they wouldn't take the risk to litigate patents. And so I think it's a very interesting trend and clear indication that the system has improved. The state of innovation. Well, yeah, important to realize, and you probably know that China now is an important innovation center. If you look at R&D spending, massive growth over the last decades. It grew tenfold between 2000 and 2016. If you look at the Global Innovation Index, which is basically an index that ranks world economies according to their innovation capabilities, well, China ranks 14. If you look at Belgium, we're 22, so we are behind China, even though we are improving between 2018 and 2020. But so Belgium is considered as a less innovative, with less innovation capabilities than China. Now, I think that today the media very often present, and everyone is aware of the important innovation capabilities of the country. When I moved to China in 2012, so it's not long ago, this was not at all the image that people had of the country. And when I explained to people I was a lawyer in Belgium, okay, I'm moving to China and do IP, people were basically laughing. What are you going to do? There is no IP there, everyone copies everyone. Of course, this was not true. This is even less true nowadays, and I think that the public opinion now has understood how innovative the country is. Doesn't mean that there is no copy, doesn't mean that there are no risks, not what I'm saying, but definitively it's an important innovation center. And if you look at surveys of European businesses that are based in China and innovate in China, well, they very often say that their Chinese competitors and their innovation capabilities are one of their biggest threats in terms of development on the Chinese territory. The state of entrepreneurship, I think it's also an interesting thing to realize that you now have in China a new generation of homegrown entrepreneurs, that they evolve within a unique ecosystem. Basically, entrepreneurship has been massively promoted by the states. The Chinese government has promoted mass entrepreneurship. Basically, the idea is that it's good to be an entrepreneur. Parents can be proud if their children decide to become entrepreneur. While, you know, maybe 10 years ago, they wish for their kids to join a state-owned enterprise. Today, this is changing, and entrepreneurs are valorized and are very popular in China. It's an interesting change. Interesting to know also that they evolve within a unique ecosystem, of course, because of the scale of the Chinese market, because of Chinese consumers are enthusiastic adopters of new technologies. So you can try things and you will have, I mean, Chinese consumers are responsive. It's also a more developing market with less legacy infrastructure. Typically, that's one of the reasons why mobile payments have taken off so rapidly and so massively in China. And also you have less stringent privacy rules, which gives an advantage in terms of well, data collection, processing, exploitation, and well, within a digital AI-based digital economy and with AI taking the lead in several sectors, the fact to be able to collect and exploit such vast amounts of data gives some Chinese companies a huge advantage. Now, very important, innovation has become a political imperative. This has been the case for many years. You really have this shift of the economy from a manufacturing base towards an innovation based economy. It's a transition from a made in China to a designed, invented, created in China. It's not a new trend, huh? It has been ongoing for many years now. But it's important to realize that innovation is really at the core of the strategy of the country, the development strategy of the country. And if you look at the latest 5-year plan, so you may know that in China, every 5 years, the authorities release a 5-year plan. It sets the main strategic development goals in terms of economical development and how to achieve these goals. And while innovation in the 13th 5-year plan had a key place, and the newly released 5-year plan also innovation has a prominent part. And there is a very clear statement that China wants to end its reliance on foreign technology. It wants to become the global leader in strategic emerging industries, frontier technology and science. They really have this goal, this national goal of becoming independent from strategic resources, including technologies. So what is interesting that comes out from this 5-year plan, I've put a link, and you will get the slides in an interesting analysis by Merix. China prioritizes quality growth over quantity growth. They want to become a self-reliant technological powerhouse. They want to become the global leader in strategic emerging industries, and really they want to become technology independent. For obvious reasons, being dependent from the US is really dangerous. If you followed a bit what happened to companies relying on semiconductors like ZTE, for example, sanctions that were taken by the Trump administration were dramatic for these companies. So they cannot afford to be dependent within the context of increased competition, within the context of trade frictions with the US. They cannot afford to be dependent from critical technologies. And so there is this goal from becoming technology independent. Now, if you focus on innovation, inevitably you will focus on IP, because IP is there to enable businesses to control, to exploit, to monetize the result of their innovation. And so if the whole Chinese economy is switching towards an innovation-based economy, obviously they need a strong and efficient IP system. And that is what they have been working on for many years now. It's not me I'm not the one saying that. President Xi Jinping has also insisted on that many times. Here is an extract of a speech he gave in 2019. Without innovation, there will be no progress. Full intellectual property protection will not only ensure the lawful rights and interests of Chinese and foreign companies, it is also crucial to promoting China's innovation-driven and quality-driven development. So I think it's a clear statement, and it sums up, how important IP has become in the innovation-driven economy that China is putting in place. Now, opportunities. China's need for advanced technology still remains strong. They want to become technology independent, as I mentioned. Well, obviously, this creates a lot of opportunities for companies that fit within the project of technology independence. Here, a few extracts regarding cleantech. China will need to invest $16 trillion by 2060 to reach net zero. The world's largest climate tech hubs, as you can see, there's a lot going on in terms of clean tech in China. I'm sure you already had seminars, or you will have explaining this in more detail. I think it's interesting for a technology company active in that sector to realize that you have plenty of opportunities. It's a clear priority to develop, to become cleaner. It's a clear priority to become technology independent. If you fit within that, you definitely have your place and opportunities in China, provided, as we will see, that you have a sound and tailor-made IP strategy. So the learnings of these few facts and figures, well, I think the first thing to mention is that the Chinese IP landscape has changed. I think you will have understood that. Remember all this shift towards an innovation-based economy, this shift from a no man's land in terms of IP towards a top national priority today. Second, well, it's possible to protect your IP rights in China. You have a complete and advanced legal system for protecting IP that is in place. It's widely used. Remember, the highest number of patents, of trademarks, of designs are filed, applied for in China, and the system is accessible to foreign companies. So it's not limited to Chinese companies, obviously. So important that you understand how it works and that you take advantage of the system that is in place. It's also possible to enforce your IP rights in China. Chinese companies make an extensive use of the IP litigation system. And again, it's available to foreign businesses. So understand it. Be aware that you can be the target of an IP litigation country when you enter China and develop a relevant IP portfolio to be able to enforce your IP rights against Chinese or foreign competitors that are active in China. Maybe most important of all is that IP has become essential for Chinese businesses. So I hope you will have understood now that, well, IP businesses are more IP aware, that perfectly understood how important IP is. IP is there to protect their competitive advantage. It's there to help them create value, to grow. And so, well, Chinese businesses are more IP rich. The whole stake of the Chinese economy is more reliant on IP. There's a clear political will to improve the system. There's a clear call from Chinese businesses to improve the system. And well, as a result, the result is improving, has improved massively. And you now have a reliable system in place. Not perfect, of course. And they're constantly striving to adapt their IP laws. The past year, they modified the patent law. The year before, it was the anti-unfair competition law, copyright law. All this is changing a lot because they constantly strive, well, to adapt their laws to a very rapidly evolving economical situation. Last learning, well, ambitious climate goals and a strategic imperative to close the technological gap create opportunities. This transition from made in China to invented in China, this will to end foreign reliance on foreign technology. Well, obviously, this creates the Hello?
Hi, Valentin. We were temporarily disconnected from the meeting.
Yeah, sorry, I had an internet problem. I will continue. Okay, 1 second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, the screen is okay again. So
this was the last slide where I got out. Okay, so I'm continuing. Was just saying, the opportunities created, I've highlighted. If you fit within the goals that have been set by the government, if you can help China close the technological gap and becoming technology independent, you definitely have your place and loads of opportunities. By supplying critical technologies, by offering contract manufacturing and R&D services for Chinese firm, of course, with a longer term risk. The day that China will have closed the technological gap, it might become more difficult to access their markets. And so this only stresses the need for European companies to stay one step ahead, to strongly innovate. I know it's easier said than done, but I believe that when it comes to China, it's very important to realize that. Now, a quick case study to illustrate well, technology transfer and the opportunities when it comes to technology and China. Well, you know what technology transfer is. It can greatly accelerate technology acquisition. Several ways to do that. You can assign your technology, you sell your patent portfolio, for example, to a partner, a client, a competitor. So you transfer the ownership. He becomes the owner of the technology. He can use it and exploit it. Another way is to license. Licensing, there's no transfer of ownership. You basically allow someone to exploit your patents, for example, provided he respects certain conditions, like paying you, for example. A third way is to contribute your technology to the capital of a company. So you can create a wholly owned company, you can create a joint venture with a Chinese partner, and basically you transfer your technology as capital contribution, and in return, well, you get shares, obviously. Several ways to structure your tech transfer to China. Again, cross-border license to a Chinese partner. You grant a Chinese company that you identify with the right to exploit your technology in China. It can be on an exclusive basis or not. You can define, you know, what needs to be paid, what he can do, not do, specific applications of your technology, for example. So that's one way. Of course, you have less control over your technology when you opt for this kind of model. You can also license your technology to a company that you set up in China, a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. Will give you better control over the technology, but obviously you have to invest more. You have to set up your company, hire people, and you have the market access challenge. You can, third way, contribute your technology to a joint venture. So you transfer your technology to a company you set up with a Chinese partner, which is pretty popular actually. And then last model that can be interesting and that we see more and more is a hybrid model where you identify a relevant partner. He invests in your company here in Europe, in Belgium, and then you set up a joint venture in China with that Chinese company. And here's a little case I would like to present you that's applied this model that we see more and more. Basic facts, well, it was a European SME, a Swedish company actually, that was active in high-tech manufacturing. It helped companies gain in efficiency. High-tech manufacturing is a core focus set by the Chinese government. They want to become more and more efficient in terms of manufacturing. And so there were opportunities in China. They had developed a specific know-how that gave them a competitive edge. They had a very good reputation in the sector. They were known as being innovative, obviously, but also as being challenge takers. So good reputation, but as very often as an SME, limited resources. It's a company that had no external investors, that wanted to grow, that wanted to internationalize, and that needed cash, obviously. So the important fact here is that the technology was fitting within the Made in China 2025 plan. I have no time to discuss about it, but basically it's one of these very important technology development plans that have been set by the Chinese authorities. It had an innovative technology. It wanted to grow, it needed cash, and it was ready to partner up with other companies, including Chinese companies, and it was ready to open its capital. It came to this conclusion, okay, we have the company in our own hands, no external investors, but now is the time, if we want to grow, to open up the capital. Because they wanted to internationalize and, among others, to access the Chinese markets. So they identified a Chinese company, started discussing. It's a company that was focusing on the same sector, high-tech manufacturing. They wanted to gain competitive edge. They wanted to become more innovative. They wanted
Valentin, we cannot hear you anymore.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, your sound is okay. You can continue, Valentin. Sorry for that.
No, okay, I'm sorry. If needed, I will switch on my 4G. Sorry for that. Right. Do you see my slides now?
Yes.
Yeah. Wait, because I'm not sure these are the right slides. You see my very first slide, or?
Yes, the first slide.
Okay, right. I don't know what happens. So here we were. So this Swedish company, active in high-tech manufacturing, identified a Chinese partner active in the same sector, wanted to gain competitive edge, wanted to be more innovative, wanted to benefit from the strong reputation attached to a foreign high-tech company. So they had aligned goals. It's a Chinese company that was really much focused on the Chinese markets. They had no plan to internationalize, but were interested to partner up and develop a very close and strategic partnership with a foreign technology company. So what was the deal? Basically, the Chinese investor company invested in the Swedish company. Swedish company kept 60% of their shares in their Swedish company. And then they set up a joint venture where the European company was a minority shareholder. So this was basically the structure. Swedish company that brings IP to the Chinese joint venture. They bring the technology, but they had developed their technology in a way that they could keep the more sensitive aspects of their technology at home. So the whole know-how and development was kept in Sweden, was not transferred to China, but still they developed an interesting corporate structure that enabled them to transfer what they had to efficiently develop in China. And on the other hand, you had this joint venture that was in charge, well, of developing the business in China. And so this is very often what you have. On the one hand, a Chinese investor with cash and with the market knowledge. On the other hand, a European company with technology, reputation, IP and development skills. And so one way to access the Chinese markets and to access to cash to finance your growth is, well, letting in an investor, a Chinese investor in your home company here in Belgium, and then set up a Sino-foreign joint venture on the Chinese markets in China to develop the Chinese market. But very important to really think and structure your technology transfer to keep maximum control. And this is what the Swedish guys did. Again, all the software and key IP and know-how was kept in their company in Sweden, so they had control over it, and only part of their technology, the hardware, was transferred to China. And it's a good example, I think, of a creative way to access the Chinese market and partner up with Chinese companies. Of course, this was only possible because they had a reliable IP strategy. They had a reliable portfolio covering China. So it made them interesting for a Chinese investor, and it enabled them to control better their technology on the Chinese markets. So maybe Peter, we can do a small pause here and do a first set of Q&A.
Yes, so I see that we haven't gotten any questions yet received yet in the chat. So to the participants, please, if you have any questions or comments, please add them, and Valentin will be happy to reply to them live during the webinar. So as we don't have any right now, I propose to continue, and we will get back to it at the end of the session.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, please do send your questions, or if you want to share a testimony, it's always interesting, of course. So don't hesitate. I will be happy to answer them. So main types of IP rights and trade secrets. A brief recap. Basically, there are two ways. I'm coming back to the intangible assets. Two ways to protect them. On the one hand, you have the intellectual property rights I've been talking about, and the exclusive right that is granted, the monopoly you have on the object of your rights. What are the main IP rights? Well, trademarks, patents, copyrights, design rights. These are the most used and best known to businesses. Second way to protect your intangible assets are trade secrets. Now, you may have heard about trade secrets and confidential information. Basically, a trade secret is not an intellectual property right. Why is that? Well, because no exclusive right is granted to the trade secret owner. Basically, the protection by trade secrets will depend on the nature of the information at stake. The way you handle that information, you have to keep it secret. Once it's public, you're not protected anymore. And trade secret law are there to protect you against unlawful acts. So let's dig a bit deeper into this. How does IP work? Let's take the example of a patent. Well, a patent grants an exclusive right on an invention. Okay, so the object of the right is an invention. What is that? Well, a technical solution to a technical problem. In order to obtain your patent, as I mentioned already, your invention needs to meet a certain number of requirements. The invention must be new, inventive, applicable industrially. Very important, the protection is not automatic. So you need to file a patent application. You need to ask to be protected and go through a whole registration procedure. And the title is then granted by a state. So it's a territorial right for a limited term. And if you obtain your patent, well, you will have this exclusive right, which is a right to exclude others from making, using, offering for sale, selling the invention without your authorization. And basically, it's the same logic that applies for copyrights, for trademarks, for designs. Okay, exclusive rights, monopoly. How do trade secret work? As I mentioned, it's not an intellectual property right. What is very interesting with trade secret is that the object of protection is very broad. It can cover technical information. It can cover an invention, for example, that is not made public. But it can also cover commercial and financial information. Your plans to expand to China, to team up with this or that partner. If you protect that information as you should, it can be considered as a trade secret. What are the conditions? Well, again, you need to meet a certain number of requirements to qualify your information as a trade secret. Obviously, the information must be confidential, secret. You must be able to prove that that information has an economic value because it is secret. What does that mean? Well, you need to prove that the information at stake grants you a competitive advantage because it is secret. And last but not least, you need to be able to prove that you adopted reasonable steps to protect the secrecy of the information. So protection of a trade secret, again, is not automatic. You have to proactively adopt measures to protect the secret character of the information. And again, no title granted, no monopoly granted. Once the information is not secret anymore, well, basically you're not protected anymore. And but the law is there to support you and to protect you against unlawful acts that are defined in the law, in the Chinese law, and same thing in Europe with the Trade Secret Directive. It protects you against unlawful acquisition, use, and disclosure of the information. Now, trade secrets and IP are complementary. They're massively used by innovative companies. And very often, well, a technology will be made out of a patent invention and then a whole set of peripheral confidential information that you don't want to disclose, but that is highly valuable. And so typically, if you license your technology to a Chinese partner, important to have a Chinese patent, and important to take the relevant measures to protect the confidential information that constitutes your technology when you transfer it to a Chinese licensee. Now, very important to understand that, well, you have different types of IP rights, and each IP right has a specific goal, a specific function, I could say. Too often I see companies that are focused on one type of IP rights. They're innovative, they focus on patents. But then they forget about designs, they forget about trademarks. That's a mistake. It's very important to understand the function of each IP right and to take advantage of these different types of IP rights. So very simply put, a trademark, well, it protects the indication of origin of goods and services. It's protect the brand identity of an organization. A patent, I mentioned it protects technical features of products and processes. It protects inventions. For example, energy conservation and storage, such as smart batteries, can be the object of patent protection. The design will protect the external aspect of a product. The copyright protect creative works. Very broad notion that also covers databases, also covers technical drawings, also covers software codes. So important rights. And then you have the trade secrets, as I mentioned, very broad object of protection. Any kind of information can actually be protected as a trade secret, provided it meets the protection requirements. And trade secrets are typically used to protect algorithms, source codes, and data, which are, of course, of importance in today's digital economy. Now, what should you do to protect your intangibles when you enter the Chinese markets? 6 steps I would like to go through with you that are extremely important if you want to protect your IP when doing business in China and when entering the Chinese market. First step, common sense, but really important. If you want to protect something, you should know what you have to protect. It's obvious, but intangible assets being non-physical, they're actually not that easy to identify. And when you question companies, especially SMEs, younger companies, very often they do not have a clear overview and comprehensive overview of their intangible assets. And so how can you protect intangible assets if you're not aware that you have them, that they are there, that they should be or could be protected? So the first thing to do is to perform an IP audit. You want to access China and exploit a specific technology there. Take the time to make an in-depth audit of your technology to understand what can be protected, what should be protected, what cannot be protected, and define your protection strategy around that. So important to have a good overview of your IP assets, understand their value, understand the value you can create and generate through the assets by conducting an audit. Once you have an overview of the IP assets you have, very important to focus on what you should protect and how you should protect it. Of course, an SME will always have a limited budget to dedicate to IP protection. That's a fact. You need to take that into account. So it's very important to prioritize your protection needs and to really understand what to protect and what will maximize your protection and the protection of your competitive advantage. So what IP assets are essential to achieve your business goals? That is really the key question you have to be able to answer. And several things need to be taken into account. What is the expected return of investors? What are the risks if you're not protected? What is the budget you have at your disposal? Again, prioritize your protection needs and work with professionals to do that. Of course, when it comes to IP and internationalization and access to the Chinese market, well, you need to assess the territorial coverage of your IP portfolio. And to determine in which countries you will want to be protected, you have to ask yourself several questions. First, what is my market? Is China a market for me today, tomorrow, maybe, certainly? This is the first question you have to answer. If the answer is yes, obviously you need to develop your IP portfolio in China. Second, what are your competitors' markets? It's also an important question to ask, because developing an IP portfolio in the country where important competitors are based can make it more difficult for them to develop competing technologies. Three, where are your potential investors located? Again, I've mentioned this already, but I insist. Investors will look at your project if you have a sound IP strategy. It's especially true when it comes to China. So if you believe that you can finance your growth by attracting Chinese investors, definitely you have to develop an IP portfolio in China. Where will you manufacture or outsource your developments? Again, China is especially relevant here. I gave you the example already of the Chinese manufacturer. You will have to transfer sensitive information to him. You don't want your manufacturer to exploit that sensitive information for your Chinese or foreign competitors and his clients, basically. And so having a strong IP portfolio can give you better control over the information and the technology you transfer to a manufacturer, and that should obviously be taken into account. Very often in today's globalized economy, where China is playing a key role, at least some of these, the answer to some of these questions will lead to the conclusion that you should protect your IP in China. And again, align your IP strategy with your business strategy. Step 3, and that is very important, create a bundle of rights. As I mentioned already, different types of IP rights serve different goals. It's important to understand that. It's important not to limit yourself to one specific type of IP. It's not because you found a patent and developed an interesting patent portfolio that you have done everything in terms of IP strategy. Don't forget your trademarks, don't forget your designs, don't forget your trade secrets. And basically keep as a rule with it the constraints of your budget, but still be aware that it's important to layer your IP. That's the more IP rights you will have, the better equipped you will be to face some very challenging, sometimes very challenging situations on the Chinese markets. So to illustrate this, I've taken a very simple object, a packaging biscuit, and if you want to look at all the different types of IP rights that you could develop to protect that very simple packaging, well, this is something you could do. Obviously, I would never advise a client to go for such comprehensive protection, but you get my point. One single object can be protected by several IP rights, and again, layer your IP, prioritize to develop cost-effective solutions, but do not limit yourself to one single type of IP rights. Step 4, and this may be the most important slide that you really should keep in mind, is have enforceable IP rights. First thing that I mentioned already, but that is really important, is the territoriality of IP rights. So it's not because you're protected in Belgium that you're protected in France, in the US, and in China. Okay, so an IP right is a territorial right, so very important to cover the countries that make sense to your business. Again, ask yourself these questions. Where do you trade? Where do you manufacture? Where do you promote and exhibit your products and technologies? Where are your competitors located? Where are your investors, possible investors located? You need to perform a strategic analysis to decide where you should develop your IP portfolio. Second, really important, registration is needed. With the exception of copyrights, IP protection is not automatic, which means that you need to register your IP rights, and you need to do that on time. Again, something I mentioned already, but I insist, you need to anticipate, you need to plan early. Typically, obtaining a patent requires the invention to be new. It means that you cannot have disclosed that invention anywhere in the world before you apply for patent protection. So you need to anticipate, because very often I see clients that say, okay, China was not on the radar, now it is. Can I patent my invention there now? Well, not. It's too late. You should have anticipated that. And one way to illustrate the need to register is this very striking sentence that not applying for IP protection in China is the same as giving a free license to use your trademark, your design, your technology to all your competitors in China. Okay, so you need to proactively register your IP to be protected. Otherwise, others have the legal right to use your IP. It's true in China, it's true in Belgium as well. If you don't register, you're not protected, which means it's in the public domain, anyone can exploit that. And obviously adapt to local specificities. What is nice with IP is that the main principles are more or less harmonized at the global level, but of course a load of differences are present in the way these principles are interpreted, are applied, are enforced by courts. So it's important to understand that to develop a relevant and sound strategy. Protect your trade secrets. Well, I mentioned already the need to take reasonable steps to protect the confidentiality of the information. Maybe one thing to add is that nowadays we have a more or less shared definition of what a trade secret is in all major economies across the globe. We have more or less the same definition in the US, in Europe, in Belgium, and in China. Important to know also that legislators in these major economies have adopted recently important legislative changes to reinforce the protection of trade secrets, to provide businesses with better tools to protect and enforce their trade secrets. And so you should take advantage of that. And it's true in China. China revised its anti unfair competition law twice in 2017 and 2019. And it's a main body of law to protect trade secrets. So don't forget your trade secrets, and again, adapt reasonable steps to protect the confidentiality of the information. What does that mean? Well, sign NDAs, insert confidentiality provisions in your contracts, have good IT systems in place, mark information as being confidential, train the people. They need to understand what a trade secret is, what they can do, what they cannot do with it. Plenty of measures that you should take. Step 6, last but not least, pay attention to IP in your contracts. Contracts are hugely important to protect your IP abroad, and this is certainly true when it comes to China. So you should negotiate your contracts in great details when you negotiate with Chinese partners. It's tough, it's long, it's complex, it's difficult, but you have to do it. And of course, well, pay attention to your IP provisions, tackle IP ownership, validity issues, scope of protection, the scope of use of the IP that is the object of the contract, and focus on confidentiality provisions. And keep in mind that IP is relevant to a lot of different contracts, not only technology license, but also manufacturing agreements, which I mentioned already, distribution and sales contracts. IP can be key. employment agreements, consultancy agreements very often have an important IP component. A quick case study, and I will finish with this example of legal measures that you can implement to avoid your trade secret thefts. So what type of measure you should take and how important are contracts. It's an interesting case here. What is the context? Well, it was in the pharma sector, not in the clean tech, but the object of the collaboration was a collaboration between a European SME and a Chinese partner. USME was active in pharmaceutical clinical trials. They wanted to subcontract part of their services to a Chinese partner. And so we had to negotiate a laboratory service agreement. Important in the context of this collaboration is that the European SME had to train specific people working for the Chinese partner. And training means providing sensitive information, means transferring confidential know-how to these people. So there was a risk. The transfer of know-how was relatively important, and so we had to organize this contractually. What did we do? We basically negotiated two types of agreements. A first service contract between the two companies, the Chinese and the European, where we negotiated in great detail the confidentiality provision, as we do in Belgium, but we adapted it and developed this for China. Here, keep in mind that all these secrecy measures, confidentiality measures you have to take, well, you can define them in the contract. You can impose them to your contract partner before transferring confidential know-how. So it was one type of contract. And then for the personnel to be trained, the people to be trained, we negotiated a personal training agreement between the European SME, the Chinese partner, and their employees that had to be trained. And this, of course, enabled the European SME to have a direct right to act either against its partner or against the personnel in case of misuse of their trade secrets. So time is running. A last slide to conclude, and then we can hopefully have some discussion and answer your questions. What you should keep from my presentation, well, align your IP strategy with your Chinese ambitions and Chinese projects. That is very important. Keep in mind that IP is there to make you more competitive, more valuable, and to create opportunities. Perceive IP as an opportunity, as a profit center, not as a cost. That's first thing. Second, absolutely key, if you want to protect your IP, you need to be proactive and you need to develop a tailor-made IP strategy. That requires to plan ahead. That requires to, well, invest in defining your strategy and building your IP portfolio. And to do that, well, perform an audit, register rights, layer your IP, create a bundle of rights, don't focus on one single type of rights. Adapt to local specificities, very important. Don't forget your trade secrets and the reasonable steps requirements. And last but not least, negotiate your contracts in great details. That's it. Thanks a lot. Before maybe moving on to the Q&A, a few words on the Helpdesk services. So the China IP SME Helpdesk is financed by the European Commission. There's plenty of free information available online, so I really advise you to go on the website of the Helpdesk, and you can download fact sheets, sector sheets, interesting information on it, any type of IP rights, trade secrets, the importance of contracts, etc., etc. It's really well done. It's very accessible. Don't limit yourself to that, obviously, but to get a first knowledge of what's at stake, that's interesting. And then obviously, yeah, they have an inquiry helpline where you can send them questions. It's a first line advice, huh? So it remains high level and a little superficial, but still can be useful. And well, for the rest, I am also obviously available. I'm based in Belgium, as was said. I used to travel regularly to China, now it's a bit on hold. but I remain very active on the Chinese markets. So Peter, happy to answer any question now.
Yes, thank you, Valentin. We have a question from Matteo Di Stefano about, would you rather recommend to protect your IP in China through the WIPO or locally with the CNIPA as a EU company?
Okay. Basically, the WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, they have put in place systems that enable to apply for protection on in an easier centralized way. Well, I guess he refers to trademark protection, where you indeed can go for an international registration that is handled by the WIPO, or you can go for national registration. I always go for national registrations because I believe the WIPO system is not really totally well suited for obtaining good trademark protection in China for several reasons. The Chinese system has a specific subclass system. So basically how does trademark work? You want to be protected for a name or a logo. You need to designate in your trademark application for which types of services and products you want to be protected. If you're active in the automotive sector, it's going to be for I don't know, several products related to the sector, but you won't be protected for any kind of service or products. Good example is Lotus. Lotus is a brand for biscuits. It's also a brand for tissues. It's also a brand for cars. And these brands can perfectly coexist while they have the same name, for example. That's the idea, that you need to identify products and services for which you want to be protected. And in China, they have developed a subclass system. So you have an international treaty that organizes classification to designate the products and services. And in China, they have a subclass system that is very specific. And it's difficult to take this into account when you go for international registration. So I usually advise to go for national registration for these reasons. Sometimes it's a bit more expensive, that's true. Sometimes WIPO can make sense as well, but I usually go for national registrations.
Okay, thank you, Valentin. This answers the question that we had in the list. So if there are no further questions, I would like to thank the speakers, also the participants in the webinar. Obviously, the content of the webinar was quite rich in terms of specific IP content. If there are more questions that would arise, please don't hesitate to contact Valentin. I will show you also the contact details, if you can see them now on the screen. So you can always reach out to him or to the IPR helpdesk, as he mentioned. So apologize as well for the few technical hiccups.
Yeah, sorry for that, and thanks to everyone.
It remains a virtual session, but we hope to see you at one of the upcoming events, either virtual or physical, in Belgium or in China. And we hope we wish you the best with your endeavors in China and for the protection of your valuable IP. Thank you.
Thank you.